welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. We got a team here today. CJ's Deputy Editor Jeff Moore and Carolina Journal reporter Brianna Kramer, and of course from the John Locke Foundation, Mitch Kokai. So much has happened since we talked to you last. We're going to kind of go through what we know right now about Hurricane Helene. As of today, it's reporting about 184 deaths, 73 in Buncombe County. That number, of course, expected to rise as more recovery goes on. A tragic situation out in western North Carolina. But I got to say, seeing the army of civilian helicopters and charities lining up and people donating food, it's got to be a little chaotic with the number of helping hands that are going out to western North Carolina, but a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think so. Whenever we have disasters and tragedies like this, you see this kind of response poke up, and there's going to be plenty of frustrations and conflicts about who gets to do this and do that to get supplies in. And lots of people want to help.
Right.
But the heartening thing about it is that so many people actually step up to help. And so we've seen that all across North Carolina. I'm from the eastern part of the state in Carteret County, where we're used to hurricane impacts. Yeah. They have offices and small businesses there gathering materials and getting them out west. You got the same going on all around North Carolina and the surrounding states. You've got big kind of celebrity type people. Tim Kennedy, the ex-Navy SEAL, I saw him video on Instagram of him flying around in helicopters helping people yesterday. So you've got a huge human response to this disaster and trying to make sure that the people are going to get what they need. And even right now, I think we've got communities that have not been quite contacted yet or access to see how bad it truly is.
Yeah, I think we don't know yet quite the full extent. One of the things we talked about just before we got rolling here, I'm seeing more and more like TikToks, videos, getting text messages directly to my phone. People who are frustrated saying, we're being told not to help. We're being told to turn around, land somewhere else. What do you think's going on there with the, people are really getting frustrated with FEMA, but I know FEMA also doesn't want to be rescuing the rescuers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you have to take anything you see on social media with a grain of salt because you never know exactly whether the story is true or not. But there do seem to be a number of reports about people who are trying to use their private resources to help who are running into some sort of government roadblock, which is too bad because the private resources stepping in can be, and in some cases ought to be, the first step. The people who are responding on their own, and then government filling in the gaps. It's a problem when folks within the government decide, hey, we're in charge, so don't do anything else, because then you have to rely on the speed of government, which even in a time of crisis cannot be the speed at which things need to get done. So my hope is that as things go forward, that you will see the folks who are running the government-endorsed side of the recovery and the people who are just trying to move forward with private efforts kind of come to some sort of understanding that this is what we're working on, go ahead and work on this. Let's make sure we don't get in each other's way and cause problems for both the private rescuers and for the government outfits, but actually make sure that anything that can be done gets done.
Absolutely. Now, Brianna, you've covered a few stories coming from Helene. It seems like there's a new one every day. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's all hands on deck with everybody trying to help. So it's been encouraging to see people step up from private organizations and lead new efforts to get resources out to the areas out there. They did have to evacuate prisons out there. We heard that this week. Over 1,000 prisoners have been transferred from 3 different facilities out there. And so they're continuing to have to shift things around and work with no power and no water. So that's a difficulty. And lots of people here in Raleigh even are, contributing resources, and they want to get this stuff out there. But I think it comes down to the roads and power and water right now.
Okay, so one of the things that we've been talking about is elections. How are we going to handle this out in western North Carolina? State Board of Elections is saying, we've been through crises before. Nothing's really going to change. What about voter ID? What happens to those who literally left with nothing on their back, but they still want to cast a ballot?
Well, even before the hurricane, there was an idea that you could have some sort of disaster exception to the voter ID, because we have had a history of having hurricanes in an election year and having it have some sort of impact. Usually, as Jeff mentioned, it's on the East Coast where people are used to hurricanes. So I was like, oh, another day, another hurricane. You don't see them very often in Western North Carolina, but still, it is the type of thing that election officials have had to deal with in the past. So there will be some sort of accommodation for people who lost their ID because they lost everything, or they didn't have an ID ahead of time but won't have time to get to a county board of elections or to get somewhere else to get an ID because of all of the problems with the recovery effort. What will be interesting to see on the ID front are a couple of things. First of all, does the federal judge who's been sitting on this federal lawsuit come out with a ruling that says we have no voter ID? If that happens, no one will have to worry about it. If that doesn't happen, if we do have the ID requirement, it will be interesting to see what the response is from the people who are keeping their eyes on the State Board of Elections. We know the Republican National Committee and the North Carolina Republican Party sued the State Board of Elections 4 times in the span of about 3 weeks over a number of different election administration issues. If the Board of Elections, which has a 3-2 Democratic majority, if it takes a step on voter ID that Republicans see as favoring one party over the other, do they sue and cause more complication? Because we know that everyone who is an eligible voter, we want them to be able to vote. We don't want Hurricane Helene to stand in the way of that. But because of all of the politics, because of all the politicking that's been done with the Board of Elections and its decisions, I'm sure that there will be some discussion about making sure that when the voter ID decision is made about what to count, what not to count, who gets an exception, that it isn't done in a way that ends up looking partisan.
Sure, sure. I mean, and it's hard for local boards of election. Tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think they could get extra money, extra supplies? You know, what are the parties? What do you think they're working on? Yeah,
I'd be interested to see if the General Assembly is going to come back at some point in the interim before the election, and if there's anything that can be done there to to allow for some of this. Practically speaking, like if you have requested an absentee ballot that's going to be mailed to your address, and your address no longer exists.
There's no house.
And things like that. Voting locations and centers, sites, how have they been affected? And so these are obviously secondary concerns to making sure that the people are okay. But as far as the election administrators are concerned, when it gets to that point, they need to make sure they can do these things. So it seems like it will be a big effect, and that the Republican parties that were keen on suing the State Board of Elections on certain administrative issues, this seems like a big complicating factor on what would they do actually, because it seems so disruptive potentially that it may be conducive to just maybe pumping the brakes a little bit on that. But I'm really unclear at this point, since we haven't even accessed some of the areas to make sure that all the people are okay. It's hard to think about how they would actually get out to vote, and if they have an ID. There are so many also, there's different recourse for proving your identity, casting provisional ballots, and then able to determine it afterwards, that I gotta imagine that's gonna be utilized in a lot of cases where they can go back and actually check and make sure the identity of the voter is who they say they are, and circle that that way. So
Now,
a few other numbers that might be interesting, because I was looking at this yesterday, so these numbers are a little bit outdated. But in terms of the mail-in ballots, in the 25 counties that are covered by the federal disaster declaration, 37,000 mail ballots had been sent as of, I believe it was Monday. And about 600 or so had been returned. So there were a bunch of ballots out there,
like
some of which, well, 30,000,
30,000,
some of which were probably washed away
when
we had the storm come through. So one of the things I know election board officials wanted to be clear to tell people is if you requested a mail-in ballot and you don't have it anymore, you still can vote. It's not as if that ballot that was sent to you that washed away in the water was your one chance. You could still do early voting. You could still vote on election day. Requesting the ballot isn't your one shot at the apple if you didn't have a chance to cast that ballot. Another interesting thing is, and I'm hoping that these numbers have changed since now, but as of yesterday, Wednesday morning, 10 of the local elections offices in the 25 counties were still closed. I mean, they hadn't been able to reopen. Now, the good news is that means 15 of them had reopened and were doing something to get ready for the upcoming election, but at least 10 of them, as of yesterday, still hadn't reopened.
Sure, sure. All right, we're going to be watching that really closely. Brianna, you did a story on the lawmakers heading out west. I know they don't want to cause another problem and be in the way as well, but a lot of them represent those areas and want to see what's happening in their home districts.
Yes, so Representative Virginia Fox, she's been working around the clock, she says, to bring resources and help out these communities. At the federal level, we also have Senators Budd and Tillis of North Carolina who are making their way out there and helping out with the efforts as well. And then state lawmakers as well, Danny Britt, and just a boatload of lawmakers coming together to really help them out. And then even from out of state, there's a lot of politicians bringing in support. We saw that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, they didn't even get as much damage as they were expecting down there, and so they're bringing their resources up here to the mountains of North Carolina.
Sure. So, are you expecting any kind of action from the state legislature when they come back? I guess next week. It's supposed to be just like a one-day session, but this has to come up.
Sure. It's a one-day session, so we're not quite sure if they have the time in one day for both chambers to make any action. But they come back again in November for a whole week. So that's when they would probably have more time to discuss the issue. But potentially next week we could see something from the House.
Sure.
And one possible thing they could do is, as Brianna mentioned, they're scheduled to come back after the session next week again in November.
Right.
But that's part of the adjournment resolution that they passed some months ago. It's possible, if they don't have anything that they can do next week, that they would at least come back and amend the adjournment resolution so that they could come back between that October 9th or 8th session and the November session, so they can actually deal with some substance. That's something they can play with, the schedule. And I'm sure this is one circumstance in which all of the legislators, even though they might grumble, would certainly come back because this is something they know they have to deal with, and that is hurricane relief.
Yeah, absolutely. And relief, it looks like we have something else brewing up at the coast. North Carolina ports. I'm hearing more and more about this strike, and that while North Carolina is a right to work state, we've got work stoppage in North Carolina.
Yeah, not another hurricane strike, luckily, but we've got a big strike on the ports on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast of the United States. So 36 ports, that includes 2 in North Carolina, 1, the Port of Morehead City, relatively small operation, and they don't have enough union members there to actually affect their workflow, so they don't have any real contingency plans. But the Port of Wilmington, as we have discussed previously, has a contingency plan where their container gate is completely shut down. So you've got that going on right now, and today we're actually learning a little bit more about the makeup of the NC Ports Authority board, and you've got a representative from the International Longshoremen's Association on the board of the NC Ports Authority, but he is also on the picket lines in Wilmington striking. And so there seem to be some conflicts there. North Carolina is a right-to-work state. We don't have a heavy union presence, but we are very much being held hostage by the union actions right now, especially when it concerns Wilmington. You've got a big operation down there. And also you've got all of the stuff coming in from the ports all along the coast that would be making its way towards inland ports and distribution centers that are going to be affected. So it's going to affect our shelves and our prices here in North Carolina, but also starting to think about how much it may affect delivery of relief items and materials to those in western North Carolina. Because even though Charlotte Inland Port is operational, it's not affected by this. But everything coming to the inland port by rail from any of the seaports, that's not going to be coming. So you've got ships putting out anchor right now on the East Coast. The union is holding strong, saying they're not going to budge until they get the agreement that they want. They're looking for about a 77% raise, I think, over a 6-year term of the contract.
77% raise?
Yes. And so their argument is that over 6 years, but their argument is that they had not gotten raises for the last 12 years, so these are 6-year contracts. In the last 2 contract years, they didn't have any raises. They're also looking for protections, guarantees against any automation of port work. If you look at videos of port work in different ports, yes, there are ports that operate with a lot more automation than some of our ports here in the United States. The longer this strike goes on, the larger the incentive is for port operators to actually automate some of these jobs so they can't be held hostage, and all of the consumers in the United States and people that some of these materials that come in aren't just things that they're not sneakers we're buying off off the shelf for Christmas, but it's actual medical supplies that we need and things of that nature. So the incentive for automation seems to go up every single day the longer the strike goes on.
Yeah, I don't know if this is
like raising
related.
the minimum wage.
It is, yeah.
Like go on strike or raise the minimum wage. That both of those things would lead to more automation.
Sure, sure. I mean, I don't know if it's related to Helene or the port strike or whatever, but I had to go to 3 places yesterday to find milk and eggs. I mean, that seems crazy. What do you think the long-term impact? Did you see that too?
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw the same thing. Costco's out of water.
Yes.
They're out of some kinds of meat, and you just see the demand picking up, I think because of both things. You have the strike going on, and so people are wanting to stock up on things.
Right.
Hopefully not the toilet paper situation
I
again.
know.
And then also with the hurricane relief, people are also buying bottled water to donate and give away. And so there's a lot of demand coming from both those angles, I think, and so we're now seeing it happen in the grocery stores.
Sure, sure. What do you think the long-term effects of this could be?
Well, it could be quite a few long-term effects. Obviously, there's going to be short-term disruption, and as we talked about last week, this could have political impacts because if people see economic problems, that tends to be bad news for the people in power, and they don't think about the people in power being like your city council or whoever runs the General Assembly. They look at who's the president, and so that would be bad news for Biden and Democrats. But this is one of those things where the long-term implications will really depend on how long this stretches out.
Okay.
If it's something that gets resolved relatively quickly, we'll see the short-term shocks, and then things will settle back into where they were. But if this goes on longer and longer, you start seeing potential for long-term problems. You also see, as Jeff talked about, more incentive to change the way things operate so that you can't have problems linked to people striking.
Sure.
And it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah,
we have seen some movement. Actually, the only real movement we've seen between the two sides has been, I think it was yesterday, the United States Maritime Alliance, who's on the other side of this contract with the union. They're the employers. Has mentioned that they are kind of willing to come back to the negotiating table maybe. The union had not budged, and they had not met in person since June, reportedly.
Really?
Yeah, and so they went on strike, and now there's been an utterance from the one side that they might be willing to come back to the table. But they're probably going to feel out how much gumption each side really has. But if you've seen any video of the union boss, he seems like, and you see some of the narrative being defined here and people taking sides because he's a real character, and he seems like a crime boss family
he does.
Guy.
Well, he takes pride that he can hold the country hostage.
And he actually has, he's been charged with racketeering in the past, and he got off. And I think there's even some indication that the lead witness against him was found not alive anymore. So there are connections to him and one of the 5 families in New York, things like this. He makes almost $1 million a year from the union, reportedly drives a Bentley. He had a 95-foot yacht that he just sold in the last couple of years. So this is the guy.
He's for the people.
Holding
the people.
Holding the nation hostage to make their demands because they want to make sure that the workers have their jobs. But what's most interesting is the guarantees against automation is really gets at the crux of what they want: a guaranteed job and salary, even if it doesn't make any economic sense for anybody to do that. They want to make sure that these guys have those jobs and they can't be replaced by technology. So
why North Carolina? Why is North Carolina honoring the work stoppage? They're not union.
Yeah, so that is a curiosity, and that's something that I think some North Carolina officials are taking a look at because we are a right-to-work state. Why do we have this union influence at our ports? Why do we have union representation on our NC Ports Authority on board of directors? So why do they have so much leverage in a state that actually prides itself on protecting workers, individual workers, fully by kind of protecting against some of the collectivization and collective bargaining and forced unionization that we see in some other states? So it's curious for sure.
Well, and remember, right to work doesn't mean no union. It just means you can't be forced to join a union. If the employers decide to hire only union people, then they're going to be dealing with the union. I mean, it's basically the idea is you can't force people to join a union. But if the employers want to work with a union and want to hire union people, that's their choice too.
Right, and the North Carolina Ports is run by the state government, right?
Yeah, so the NC Ports Authority does not hire or employ any union members. So the ports are operated by third party, like these are port operators, management companies. So the port in Morgan City, the port in Wilmington, I don't even know if it's the same company, but I believe that it is. And so they manage operations, and so that's like a big contract that they have, and then they're hiring the labor. And so it's a mix, and they have hybrid kind of employment. So they have some union members and some non-union members. Moorhead City, it's not the union membership, it's a pretty small representation. In Wilmington, it's larger. They have more of those union kind of jobs because they have a larger facility and operation in Wilmington. So it's the third-party operators, and they are beholden to some degree to the labor contracts and everything. So I think that they make a calculation about, do we honor this work stoppage or not? Well, we have this percentage of people that are union members, they're going to strike, and so I think they play along to a certain degree because this is a relationship, even though it seems contentious. Like when they sign the new contract, then they're back together again. So it's like a tumultuous marriage of some sort, where like they're really on each other's last nerve for a while, and then they're back together. So hopefully they get back together sooner rather than later, so we're not looking at empty shelves and higher prices. Yeah.
Wow. This could really be a big deal. Now, as we kind of move on, I want to get an update quickly on, if we can, on Republicans' lawsuit about challenging 225,000 ballots in North Carolina. What's the latest on that?
Well, it's voter registrations, and I referenced
voter registration,
earlier
not ballots. I'm sorry, my mistake.
Referenced earlier that the Republican National Committee and the state Republican Party had filed 4 lawsuits against the State Board of Elections in the span of about 3 weeks in August and September. One of them challenged the form that the elections officials used to register voters late last year. Basically, the form, as part of the Help America Vote Act, was supposed to have somewhere for people to indicate either the last 4 digits of their social security number or a driver's license number, because you wanted to make sure that these are people who really can vote. They can vote. They have the eligibility to do so. The form didn't have that information. The Elections Board eventually changed things so that the form did have that information. But the lawsuit said, look, there are these 225,000 voters that you register without this information that you're supposed to have under the federal law. What you should do is take these people off the rolls, or if not, have them vote with a provisional ballot so you can go back and make sure that they are actually eligible to vote. The Elections Board didn't want to do that. Republicans sued. So that case was initially in state court. The State Board of Elections had the case moved from state court to federal court because they said this is a Help America Vote Act issue. That's a federal law, should be in federal court. So a hearing is now scheduled on October 17th. Initially, the hearing was to deal with the State Board of Elections motion to dismiss the lawsuit. But now the Republicans have also filed paperwork to remand the case back to state court. So the hearing that was already scheduled in the middle of October is going to be dealing probably with both issues. First, it will deal with the remand issue. If it remands it back to state court, then the federal judge won't have to deal with anything else. But if he rejects that, then he may also take up the motion to dismiss from the State Board of Elections. So sometime in the middle of October, we'll find out a little bit more about that case. The others, real quickly, to remind you about, one is the UNC mobile ID. State Court of Appeals had said no to the mobile ID for voter ID for this year. And then the 2 others that are hanging out there, one of them is the suit that says the state did not do a good job of looking at juror questionnaires that people filled out that said, I'm not a citizen, so I can't serve on a jury. They're saying if you're not a citizen, you can't serve on the jury, shouldn't be registered to vote either. And that suit's still brewing out there. And then there's another one dealing with the mail-in absentee ballot envelope. There's a spelled out process of the envelope you have to use to send in your mail-in absentee ballot. The Republicans are saying the guidance from the State Board of Elections is too lax on that. They're not following what the law actually says. So all of those lawsuits are still kicking around out there as we get closer and closer to Election Day. The only one that has seemed to have had any resolution right now was the one where the State Court of Appeals said no UNC mobile ID as a voter ID. And right now, we think that's where that stands. I haven't seen any appeal from the state to the state Supreme Court.
All right, and the clock is ticking. Certainly, we have early voting starting on October 17th. and also when we're going to have the new Carolina Journal poll out. We're going to have really, really good numbers right there, right as you're getting ready to go cast your ballot if you want to vote early. So make sure you pay attention to what's happening at Carolina Journal. We're going to have a poll lunch and presentation on with our new poll numbers on October 17th. If you want to head over to carolinajournal.com, you can register and join us there. We're going to have two, one in Raleigh, one in the Charlotte area. So I hope we can see you there, and thanks for joining us on The Debrief.